scholars, poets, writers, etc., etc. So the objectives first. So this is important to understand why they're doing. I kind of already suggested a couple of things, but first of all, again, returning to my previous point, narratives or a narrative is very, very important, right? So they are trying to change through these operations, to change the understandings of history and perceptions. This is the most important sort of concept, the perceptions of reality among Western academics, intellectual elites, politicians, and broader audiences, right? They are trying to promote this pro-Russian sentiment and, most importantly, pro-Kremlin narrative and talking points. Those talking points that emanate right from the Kremlin, from Putin. And finally, what is the sort of the one of those important goals? They try to foment some kind of divisiveness within American and Western society. So they try to provoke some kind of political instability. They try to support some kind of movements that we already have in the United States to take advantage of those cleavages and just to stir this process of instability in the United States, and we have plenty of those examples. We will discuss them perhaps at the end, if you will. And another thing, let me change it again if I can. I don't know. I do something wrong here. I think I don't know. The first was better, but we're okay now. So, and they are, ultimately, they're trying to shape the psyche and ideological preferences of us, of those people who at least are trying to think critically, and among those people, of course, who are those targets that I mentioned before, the military elite, the political elite, policy makers, people who are trying to maintain, to sustain our cultural traditions, etc., etc. Those narratives, of course, are designed, if we think about the most current events, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, they're trying to turn the public against, if you will, Western values, meaning they're trying to persuade them that we are doing this for a certain purpose. There is a higher purpose behind it, and they're trying through their narratives to persuade broader audiences that we are right and you are wrong, because if you don't know that, we will explain it in a very sort of plain language, that NATO expanded, you were ready to attack us. But I can decode this particular narrative later, of course. And ultimately, again, and I'm repeating this thesis again and again, so ultimately the Russian Federation is trying to achieve some kind of superiority, if you will, because this is Putin's beautiful dream about Russia becoming again a very powerful country. People have to listen to what I have to say as the leader of the Russian Federation. And I want to be in the club. Because now, currently, as you might imagine, Putin is not in the club of those democracies, and the United States doesn't have we have still a dialogue on some points that we want to discuss, but we don't have those diplomatic relations with the Russian Federation because of what happened in Georgia, in Ukraine most recently. And don't forget, those two countries are just not only countries that have been exposed to this Russian influence. Abkhazia, right? Because as we speak, Putin is trying to grab more territories from Georgia, Abkhazia, Dagestan, etc., Moldova, Transnistria. So we have to remember about those places because Putin is trying to expand. Ask me for what reason, I don't know. I don't know because he cannot control his own territory. As you might imagine, the Ukrainians most recently, it was just a very unusual and abrupt move on the part of the Ukrainians to take over part of the Russian Federation, Kursk, the Kursk region. And it demonstrated, this particular successful operation demonstrated for the whole world that the Russians cannot protect their own territory, but they are trying to bite to get a piece of the Ukrainian territory. They were completely exposed in terms of a lack of their capabilities. It's amazing. Next, if I can change it. Too far? Sorry? Okay. So what he does, I just like this word, and perhaps you might agree with me that this word reflects on the essence of what Putin does. He weaponizes history. We know that he believes that he's a great historian, and through his narratives, he is trying to actually to demonize a target state or an individual. It doesn't matter. It depends on the current goal. But the weaponization of history, of those narratives, is very important to him. As I mentioned before, he promotes false historical narratives. He promotes false narratives about what happens in Ukraine or in the United States today. So if you ask me what is happening in my discipline, meaning intelligence studies and also Slavic studies, because I'm kind of working in between, ask me, is it a peaceful situation when I go to conferences? It's a war. It's a war, and there are a lot of scandals among scholars, and I'm talking about international conferences. I attend approximately from 4 to 5 conferences per academic year. It's a busy schedule, and I'm all over the place. It's not only the United States. We're talking about Intel conferences, Slavic conferences, and I meet all those people who were not only influenced by the Russian Federation, they're simply being paid. And we will discuss this in a moment, how you can be potentially paid by the Russian Federation to sustain this pro-Kremlin narrative. So it's a war, and sometimes it's very frustrating. Each time I have to prepare myself very carefully to withstand this particular pressure, because sometimes it's very difficult to even to offer the audience some kind of evidence, because the evidence is there. But I don't have, so to speak, tangible evidence to suggest that this person simply a Russian spy. He or she is a scholar, but at the same time, this person works for the Russian. Plus, don't forget, I have to be very careful, because you can be sued for that. So you have to understand that this particular 2 disciplines right now is a battle, a constant battle between 2 camps. Those people who support the real version of history, of reality, of democracy, if you will, and the other version that is being adopted or promoted by those people who like to please Russia for one reason or another. And plus, don't forget, some of them are not bribed. Some of them simply believe in Russia. They developed some kind of affinity with this country because when they were young, perhaps they were traveling there, they have their own memories, etc., etc. Some nostalgia is there. So everybody is doing this for a variety of reasons, but we will talk about this. We're not sitting doing nothing. We're publishing, and Truly Yours is also working in this respect. I have to be very, very careful what I say, how I say it, but 2 books edited, it's what you see, Crisis in Russian Studies, in the second volume, Russian Disinformation and Western Scholarship. These 2 volumes were edited by a friend of mine, a brilliant scholar, Taras Kuzio. He's a British scholar, and we all contributed chapters to this particular 2 volumes, and I'm glad that something comes out. People can read it, can critically assess it, what we have to say. And the 3rd volume has been edited by me, and it's just all about Russian active measures. You already are familiar with this particular term. I gathered a very interesting international team of scholars, and we decided to publish a volume in which every single scholar discusses a situation in his or her country. In his or her country. So there are Italians, there are people, Danish, Americans, British, etc., etc. So if you're interested, take a look. So they are concerned, and everybody is concerned, and perhaps this particular volume would provide some kind of, understanding, a better understanding of what is happening in this particular world, Western academia, how scholars are being influenced by a foreign state for the purpose of ideological subversion. Now, a very important point that I want to make. Of course, all these Russian intelligence's approaches in the United States, they are kind of shaped, as I mentioned before, by KGB practices, by KGB approaches, and the Russians are using these particular approaches over and over and over again. So again, just to reinforce this particular information. So they try to persuade, co-opt, or bluntly recruit Western intellectuals. They pay them. They try to build some kind of support for Russian foreign policy, ideologically subverting these particular individuals. They try to promote Russia's influence around the world, and they try to inspire or provoke some kind of criticism of our own government among the Americans. I'm not suggesting that this is a bad thing. We all have to critically think about what our government does, domestically and in terms of foreign policy. However, as I mentioned before, there is a very subtle boundary between criticism and a hostile, militant approach to some other opinion, etc. Unfortunately, many of us forgot how to debate without going into personalities, attacking your opponent personally, etc., etc. So the culture, through these particular operations, the culture of debates is is being obscured, and people forget how to do this. So it's just very important to remember about this. And the goal is, of course, to spread some kind of confusion, chaos among ordinary people, so that they feel undecided or confused. So chaos is the perfect landscape, mental landscape, social landscape for the other side, the side that attacks us, trying to subvert us. So a chaotic state is of mind is just a very typical, unfortunately, phenomenon for many, many people. Sometimes you hear even those scholars who present their research, and very often, very frequently, I think, God, what a chaos in the mind of this person. So no logical conclusions, no cause-effect sort of connections whatsoever. And how is it possible? How is it possible for them, if they were trained to be actually intellectuals? So this is a problem. Now, a few words about the tactics. So you understand the objectives that of the Russian Federation, but you understand, perhaps I mentioned this several times, the targets, right? But how do they do this? I mean, how do they co-opt Western intellectuals? First of all, they would gently invite you, politely invite you to participate in a conference, for instance, and this conference would be a very prestigious forum that was organized by the Russian Secret Intel, for instance, in Moscow. Or the most typical example is the Valdai Forum. It was just organized by Putin himself. It takes place in Valdai, one of those popular destinations of Putin. And the organizers invite scholars that they think might be potentially subverted, or they publish texts that already suggest that they are gravitating toward this Russian narrative, and they are gladly inviting those people to attend this particular forum. As an example for you, but scholars believe, okay, this is prestigious, this is unique. My colleague, he was not invited. We're working in the same area, but I was. So I will go. So, and guess what? You're going not just to simply to participate, but you are paid, not only for your travel expenses, huge honorariums, etc., etc. So isn't it a wonderful way of trying to actually to subvert you? And then after you attended this particular forum, after you were exposed to all those narratives, it's very difficult to publish something that would oppose this particular narrative. You have friends, you develop friendships among those people, and among them, by the way, there are a lot of people who work for Russian Intel, pretending to be scholars. So, I mean, you understand the atmosphere. This is one of those ways how the Russians do this. Research grants. Plenty of them. And sometimes scholars are looking for those grants, including myself. I look for grants because for us, having a reasonably modest salary from universities, we are looking for research grants to support our research in a foreign country. For instance, last summer, I received 2 grants, one from the State Department. It was not that dangerous because it was the United States grant. The other was very questionable, but then you have to verify the sources. Who established this grant? I wanted to go to the Baltic states because I need to conduct research in the former KGB archives in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. So my point is you have to be very, very selective, knowing what you are doing, for which grant you are applying, who established this grant, because I don't want to be supported by the Russian administration, or basically the presidential administration of the Russian Federation. So you have to know the origin of those grants, absolutely. But some people are not that selective. They grab the money, they apply, they see $10,000, $20,000, they go. They don't care. So, I mean, this is a problem. Honorariums that I mentioned already. And forums, I mentioned already. Now, how, in what particular way they spread this particular false narratives, disinformation, through cyber domain. So, and they can use state-sponsored media. I think you know that we have RT stations, state-sponsored TV in the territory of the United States. Ukraine already gave up on this. There is a presidential order. No Russian state-sponsored TV stations here in the territory of Ukraine. In the United States, I'll give you an example, very practical example. I live between two houses. One house is in Tiffin because I teach here, and the second is in Pennsylvania. First state, my home state, because it was my state where I came for the first time to the United States. I fell in love with a lovely gentleman who is an American. He's a professor, but he is not in my area, communication studies professor. And his home was Pennsylvania, Penn State. So, and I came to Pennsylvania, and now we are kind of in between, commuting back and forth. And there is a lovely Russian store, where I can buy not only Russian food. I don't buy Russian food as a matter of protest for me, so it's a matter of principle. So, but I buy Ukrainian food that I am accustomed to. And in this Ukrainian store, there is a TV, and the cashier who is there listens to this RT station, and she came from my hometown, from Kharkiv. I never told her that it is just sort of inappropriate, but what can I do? It's available in the United States. RT, the abbreviation for the Russian most popular TV station, state-sponsored, disinformation, Russian narratives are all over the place. So being politically correct, I would never tell her anything, but still. So state-sponsored media, social media, because we know how anybody can use social media to promote his or her own ideas, etc. Proxy sources, something that I already mentioned, front organizations, those organizations, meaning think tanks, etc., that are NGOs that are established on American soil. We have thousands of them here. So that's how they spread their disinformation. Yeah, just this slide is all about actually one idea that I wanted to mention here. For some reason, the Russian intelligence agencies believe that front organizations are the most effective way of spreading disinformation. If we're talking about the United States, more specifically the United States, because they are very subtle in terms of their approach. They have been established as those perhaps think tanks or language institutes or cultural centers that promote Russian culture, and under this particular umbrella you can do right about anything. You can continue to enforce all those and reinforce all those pro-Kremlin and Kremlin talking points. And formally, our government cannot do anything about them. You can attend any meeting as a person who wants to be immersed in some kind of foreign culture, more specifically Russian culture, or learn Russian language. Nothing is wrong with that. But there is a sort of a hidden agenda that we have to be aware of, and if our government had time or resources to attend those meetings, they would understand what is the real goal behind all those front organizations. So in the background, and by the way, I wanted just to mention a few of them. Россотрудничество, which is translated Russian cooperation, is all over the United States, all over. We have so many chapters of Россотрудничество in many states for the same purpose. SWAP, I will talk about SWAP in a little while. You will know more about this particular organization. The Council on Foreign and Defense Policy. They pretend to be a think tank, but what they do, they spread Russian propaganda, actually. The Strategic Culture Foundation. Why, you might ask me, why do we have Columbia in the background? And some of you might recognize the library at Columbia University. And in front of it, there is a beautiful square, etc., etc. Why is it there? I taught at Columbia from 2015, I think 2 years I was there. No, from 2013 until 2015. And what I noticed back then, because that was just the time when I just finished my dissertation, and I was invited there to teach, and I realized that the Herman Institute and the School of International and Public Affairs, where I was teaching, systematically invited people who I knew, without even conducting research, who I knew that they were Russian agents of influence. Among them was Symes, and I will say a few words about this person, and etc. A lot of people were invited. I knew back then that they are working for the Russians. They're spreading Kremlin narratives, Putin's narratives. 2013, it was when I started that, it was a year before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And when the Ukraine revolution, the most vigorous, happened in Ukraine, known as the Revolution of Dignity, right? When the Russian Federation sent snipers that were strategically positioned on the roofs of the buildings that surrounded the square where 1 million people gathered to protest against the corrupt Ukrainian government, a puppet of Yanukovych, of the Russian regime, and they were killed. Approximately 100 people were killed. I knew back then that these people who were invited as guest speakers to the Herman Institute, Columbia University, that they promote a very softly, so to speak, promote not pro-Russian narratives, but they simply suggest that in Ukraine there is a civil war. In the Donbass there is a civil war, and we knew that the Russian troops already invaded the Donbass. So it was a deliberate attack to persuade people that Ukraine is a failed state, some chaos, political instability is happening there, and the Russian Federation has nothing to do with that. So, and I was very, very surprised back then, but unfortunately Columbia University has its own approach to this. They try to be politically correct, and they still invite people who later are indicted by the American government, by our legal system. As an example, if I can change it, just a moment. Symes that I mentioned, he was indicted most recently, actually we're talking about June 2024, and I saw him talking on a number of occasions at Columbia University and at other places. He's been working in the United States as a Russian spy, a person who spread Russian disinformation since the late 1970s. Scholars knew that. Everybody knew that, but the CIA finally investigated this case after some kind of pressure from scholars, because we attend all those meetings, we attend all those conferences, we hear all those talking points that emanated from Symes, supporting the Kremlin, supporting Putin, and we had enough, and we tried to pressure our government to investigate this particular case, and finally they did. I praised the CIA for their effort, and some of my colleagues said, "Olga, why are you praising the CIA?" I said, because they finally got them. They established the channels through which the Russians channeled money. We're talking about thousands of dollars. They were paid for their services. But then the argument was, we are not satisfied with the actions on the part of the CIA, with their approach, because Symes, already with his beautiful wife, Anastasia, both of them were indicted. They escaped to the Russian Federation, to Moscow more precisely, before they were indicted. Yes, the CIA, the government seized their property, hundreds of acres that they bought using Russian money, but still, I mean, why are you praising the CIA? Because they were late. We were talking about this, discussing this particular point about the Symes family forever. And only now, when finally, you know, the third year of this Russian invasion in Ukraine, finally they decided to investigate this couple who lived beautifully, all kinds of lavishly, I mean, in Virginia, in their beautiful estate. But, you know, this is the reality, unfortunately. We are a step kind of behind the Russians always, for now. I hope the situation is going to change. Both escaped to the Russian Federation. Another example, Dmitry Trenin. You have to know this name because the same approach by our governmental officials, they kind of looked the other way. We were shouting about this Trenin. He was the former colonel of the GRU, military intel, so working for the Russians for years. So he was in charge, the director of the Carnegie Moscow Center. He was in between New York and Washington, D.C., constantly spreading propaganda, Russian propaganda at all conferences that we attended. I don't remember even one case when he was at least fair in terms of assessing this or that event. So the same situation, escaped to Moscow. He was not indicted because they didn't have any perhaps tangible evidence to suggest that he was receiving money for his services. Back to Moscow. Now he is part of all kinds of Russian talk shows, claiming that Ukraine is a Nazi state, etc., etc. Here in the United States, he was reasonably quiet, but still, in a very sophisticated way, he spread Russian propaganda, Russian talking points. And finally, most recent case, right, September 2024, Konstantin Kalashnikov and Yelena Afanasieva. They were indicted because it turned out, you can read, I don't want to tell you the entire story, but they finally, they violated, most important, all of them violated this particular law, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and committed money laundering. So, I mean, finally, they were investigated. We have evidence. They are indicted, but they are nowhere to be found. All right, so again, we are behind in terms of our action toward them, and this is sad. This is sad. Now, I promised you to maybe tell you a little bit more about one of those front organizations that I wrote about. I conducted some research and I published an article about this SWAP. It's an abbreviation for the Council on Foreign and Defense Policy. This particular organization was established immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union by Russian politicians, oligarchs, etc., but among those who established this organization was, of course, people who were part of Russian intel agencies. It turned out that the members of this organization can be, according to their protocols, can be Russian citizens and also citizens of any country. So they decided to establish chapters in the United States, in many states in Europe, etc., etc. It's interesting that after the war, this full-fledged invasion of Ukraine, they evacuated their people and curtailed the activity of those chapters all over the world, SWAP. But still, what they do, they invite scholars, they invited me, They didn't know who I was, apparently, so they shouldn't have invited me. But they invited me to publish in one of their venues, to submit an article, a scholarly article that they have, actually. I will tell you what this venue is all about. But I published an article about this, and of course there was immediately an attack of a person against me who was part of their, I think, of their board, etc. And it was just, it's a long story. I will tell you privately if you want to know what happened. But who actually, with whom does this particular front organization cooperate? Take a look at the list. So the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, of course the presidential administration, the State Duma, which is the state parliament in the Russian Federation, the Council of Federation on Foreign Affairs and Defense, etc., etc. All those federal institutions that have been penetrated by Russian intel long time ago. So we understand the nature of this organization, because you don't have to, to dig deep, very deep. You go to their website in Russian. I think they have also a website in English. And you read their documents, protocols, etc. One of the most, one of those major objectives is just to try to persuade Western audiences that Russia is a peaceful country. We are trying to fight evil such as NATO, that is trying to expand and create some kind of threat to our national security, etc., etc. So again, through some kind of spreading narratives, that's what they're trying to do. So the chairman of this particular organization is Fyodor Lukyanov. And he's been chairing this particular front organization since 2012. As you can see, he is also, the chief editor of Russia and Global Affairs Journal, the journal that this particular front organization established. I was invited to submit an article there, I think, before the invasion. It was 2021. I politely rejected this opportunity, but they are trying to probe the ground, to test the ground, to send invitations to their forums, to send invitations to Western scholars, including American scholars, to attend a conference. And plus, don't forget, Fyodor Lukyanov, first of all, he is the best friend of Putin. Of course, he works also for the Russian intel, for sure. And another thing, what I wanted to tell you, that unfortunately, he was one of those students here in the United States, exchange students, that adopted all these interesting approaches from the Americans, learning how you can effectively propagandize a topic, etc., etc. So he learned from us, and then he returned. It was just before the collapse of the Soviet Union, when he was directly working for the Russian intel. And then he came back to Moscow, and then through his a number of promotions, he grew to this particular person who simply, he's a friend of Putin. And I mentioned previously the Valdai Forum. He is the director, the research director of the Valdai Forum. And this forum invites, again, Western scholars to attend this conference. Putin personally is present at this Valdai Forum regularly, systematically, so you have an opportunity to talk to Putin personally and to ask him questions. What an honor for many people, right? So a lot of people say, of course, it's an honor, I will be there. And people are very nicely paid for this particular opportunity, for attendance, basically. So how does it work in practice? So SWAP creates chapters in the Russian Federation and in many, many countries, democracies actually, then inviting, again, to repeat this scheme, inviting foreign scholars to either to publish or to contribute a chapter to a book that is supported by the SWAP. Then they might invite a scholar or a group of scholars with some kind of favorable views of the Russian Federation to attend the Valdai Forum, and then awards. Absolutely. So without this, they cannot co-opt a person, they cannot just persuade a person sufficiently enough. So unfortunately, among those people who got the bait is one of my former colleagues, meaning not colleagues, but he was part of the Ukraine's Academy of Sciences. He was the director of the Institute of History at the National Academy of Sciences. His name is Georgy Kasyanov. He was recruited by another person, Alexei Miller, who is a historian. He's a SWAP board member, and they are, by now, they are friends, I guess, but you have to read what they write. This is just something. So basically, they're taking words from the mouth of Putin, and then they finesse the language, and they publish their texts as a scholarly work. And they became quite popular because the texts are rather sophisticated. All right? I have to finish. And I'm almost finished.
We'll have some time for questions would be great.
Yeah, at 12, our last minute. Okay. So, I'm finished almost. So, so you understand how it works, and we have people who do this. So 1 minute, and we will get to our questions if you have one. So what should we do in this respect? The federal government should change, I think, the laws and regulations against damaging key influence mechanisms, develop law enforcement capacities, difficult to pronounce, and alleviate and exploit our vulnerabilities that can be potentially exploited. I like this particular model that our friends in Sweden created. There are two missions. They identify and monitor Russian clandestine information related operations in Sweden. And then they try to educate Swedish society in a variety of ways. And they are very, very assertive. We have to do something like this in the United States through our shared common efforts. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm sorry.
No.
Oh,
Give that. Okay. Yeah, this is fascinating, and I'm sure this PowerPoint is going to be great. Now, Vicki is on that side. We only have a few minutes, but we would love to, if you have any questions, we'll be able to take a couple.
I have one right here.
I just have a quick question relating to an article I just saw about a retired sheriff from Florida who is working for the Russian government, setting out special social media. And I just didn't know if you were aware of it or not, but it's a retired sheriff from Florida who is now living in Russia and paid by the Russian government to spread disinformation on social media.
I have to give you my business card. You have to send me this information. No, I'm not aware of this particular case. And believe me, there are so many cases that it is just ridiculous. Even you have to spend all your life to trace all those individuals and connections and it's a lot of work. You have to invest a lot of time investigating this. My dream is, I love to teach, but my dream is not to teach and conduct research. Then I can embrace more cases and publish all of it that I want to publish, but I was not aware of that. But it's kind of typical. It's kind of typical, I would say.
Okay, we
But
have one
thank
over
you.
here. Oh, sorry. We have one over here.
I wanted to ask our speaker what her opinion is about the fact that there wasn't a bigger fuss made when Crimea was annexed. It's been about 10 years now from before the war began, of course. Do you understand my question?
So you would like me to share my opinion about why we kind of...
Why we in this country or in the West didn't make a bigger fuss about Crimea?
Thank you, now I understand. So it's a political issue. Let's recall, who was the president in the United States during this particular moment? We're talking about the annexation happened before, if I remember, before February, in March of 2014. So I think the Obama administration, am I correct or no?
Yeah.
So if you remember the history a little bit, Obama and Hillary went together to the, I think maybe Hillary only went to the Russian Federation and brought a symbol of a reset button with the Russian Federation, meaning a button of that you have to push physically as a symbol to reset and to create or to rejuvenate nice relationships with the Russian Federation. That was a mistake because it happened, I think, before Crimea, before the annexation. But the policy was still there. We don't want to complicate the situation. We perhaps have to maintain those nice relationships that we managed already to establish over 2 or 3 years before the annexation. That was the policy, number one. And number two, perhaps, and another fact for you, in case you were not following this particular issue, Obama, unfortunately, when the invasion already began to unravel, happen, he didn't provide any lethal weapons to Ukraine. They were caught by surprise, and what the order was, give them some goggles, night vision goggles, maybe non-lethal weapons. The Ukrainians were absolutely powerless to defend either Crimea or the Donbass. And I would be, in this particular respect, I would be more assertive if I was the President of the United States, because what is at stake, the struggle between democracies and authoritarian regimes. And now, because of this appeasement, if I may use this word, we have what we have. I don't know, maybe you don't like this answer, but I'm trying to be as honest as possible.
I think
Thank you.
we have time for one more.
I mean, this is a little different scenario, but one we hear a lot of is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and then the since we're on a college campus now, the college campus, disruptions because of the Palestinian cause. Can you comment on that?
I will begin by saying one thing. Let's not forget that the war that we observed there is the same war that we observe in Ukraine. Today, we know absolutely for sure that the Russians instigated, provoked, and actually prepared Hamas to attack on October 7th. I mean, we have to see the connection. And actually, there are two purposes behind it. First, to distract public attention from his war in Ukraine and to provoke some kind of chaos in the Middle East. And by the way, we withdrew from the Middle East. If you remember how it happened, it was just not a very elegant way of withdrawal, but still, we are not there. We don't dominate the region. The Russians do. So they're interested in this particular chaos in the Middle East. And plus another, as a side effect, the attention would be distracted from Ukraine. He might achieve some goals there. And second, we probably understand that Israel has a very special status. Israel is not part of any military alliances, right? Because to begin with, Israel wanted to have some freedom to make decisions by himself, not to be influenced or dragged down or by some kind of responsibilities. So, and they, in this respect, they can act very quickly, immediately when it's needed to be addressed, some kind of major chaos or problem. But at the same time, this particular sort of status of Israel is not, I would say, is not very much appreciated by the Americans. And we understand that Israel has a lot of freedom in terms of acting on their own. We support Israel, absolutely. But at the same time, our position is sort of in between. We're trying to, very hard, to be balanced. And very often we accuse even the Israelis of doing wrong things, killing civilians, etc., etc. And this particular official status inspires some kind of popular movements in defense of the Palestinians, the Palestinian cause, etc., etc. But the knot is so tight and very complex that it's very difficult even to understand in what particular way we should act or should design our foreign policy to stabilize the situation. The situation, from my perspective, can be stabilized only in one particular way. If my country or a person who is a citizen of Israel, if their country is invaded, they have to do what they have to do. If terrorist organizations such as Hamas, Hezbollah, exist supported by the Russian Federation, they have to be eliminated physically. So a notice has been issued: leave the country if you are a civilian. Too bad. Otherwise, this task cannot be achieved. And if it cannot be achieved, this particular situation would continue. You might not share my sort of assertive position, but that's the reality. I'm a realist and I understand. Leave my territory. We will restore the borders, and we will go further if we need to simply kill those terrorists. That's what Israel does right now. But there is another side of the story which, from my perspective, is very, very questionable. But thank you.
Okay, let's give Dr. Bertelsen another round of applause. We're so grateful to have you here as a faculty member for our students. I'm sure our students love taking your classes. Your talk today was very fascinating, so thank you for being here. Make sure you turn in your surveys, as always, and your name tags. If you'd like to sign up for the book club, as well as the tech tips, that sign up is back there. We look forward to seeing you next week for our 150 Years of National Machinery with National President and CEO Andrew Kalnow, who will be bringing a new short film along with a panel of retired national employees. So have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.